Welcome to the Denver Gazette Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Schmaedeke. Today, we're brought to you by Applewood Plumbing, Heating, and Electric. They have been serving Denver residents for 50 years. They are the proud sponsor of the Colorado Avalanche, as well as this podcast. And on this podcast today, we're talking Rockies baseball. As opening day is Thursday. So we're going to break down the roster, which is pretty much complete with Luke Zahlmann. Luke, baseball's here. That's all I can say.
Yep, baseball's here after all the stuff you write about in spring training, and then it almost feels brand new when it comes to opening day. So baseball's the rare sport where it feels like we get two of them.
Yeah, and it starts counting on Thursday in Arizona as they play the defending NL champions, which will be fun. So you and I were talking off air, and I want to kind of start here. Like, this roster is very interesting for a team that'll probably lose games in the 90s.
Yeah, I think it's such a weird disconnect, I think, in discourse about baseball when you look at the actual players the Rockies have versus the teams they're being compared to. Because right now, all projections have them on the same level, basically, as the Oakland A's. And when you compare those two rosters, they're almost not comparable. So it's a very interesting dichotomy of what the roster looks like on paper versus what the projections are spitting out. And obviously injuries play a role in that.
All right, so let's kind of break down this roster. It's pretty close to being set. The big news today was that Michael Toglia has made the opening day roster, which we didn't know if that was going to happen. Well, what do you make of that? Do you think he's going to get enough at bats up here with the big club?
Yeah, I think the fact that they are leaving him on the roster would signal that they plan to get him at bats, because last year, part of the reason that he went back to AAA was you have a couple of issues that we cannot fix up here with limited playing time. You're not going to be able to fix them. So they sent him down. He also went to winter ball to get more at bats. So basically the way they thought to fix his issues was, hey, we're just going to let you see a lot of pitches, have a lot of at bats, and just work through it and just work on it. So he had an awesome spring. And I think that they came down to, well, are we really going to send him down because he has options left? Or are we going to reward him for winning the camp? Because when you hit 5 home runs, he just had a good spring. And the average may not have been where he might like it by the end of spring, but I think he showed the most upside compared to a Sean Bouchard, who ended up getting optioned. I think Bouchard didn't have a very good camp. He showed the eye, but the hitting wasn't there, and I think that Toglia also offers a better fielding option at his spots than Bouchard does.
So I kind of want to just go through the starting lineup with you. So at catcher, it's Elise Diaz. That's pretty set. Jacob Stallings, once a week?
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised to see, after how much they used Elias last year, maybe they work with Stallings a little more. He struck out 9 times, walked 7 times in spring training. So he's a very veteran guy. And you never want to count on injuries, but he could be a starter for them pretty consistently if an injury were to ever come. So their catching room is actually really solid this year.
At first base, Chris Bryant will probably start there. Montero will see time there. Toglia could see time there. But as Chris Bryant at first, I think it's probably the best idea to maybe keep him a little healthier.
Yeah, I think it was, and that's why they went with it. It was the best of the options they had. They could either keep trying to push the outfield thing, keep risking. You have to think, a lot of these injuries, you're talking a plantar fascia, you're talking heel, you're talking these things that are all really movement based. And so putting him in the biggest outfield in the league, that's going to make him move a lot. So I liked it. I think he's athletic enough to be able to kind of master that position. He's a third baseman by trade, so he's pretty good at controlling a corner. It's just the opposite corner. So I think he'll be a perfectly serviceable first baseman. Obviously, health is the big thing for him.
And in the middle, you've got Brendan Rodgers at second, and then Ezekiel Tovar at shortstop, who just got paid. We could touch on that in just a second. But Brendan Rodgers, I feel like he's the forgotten Rocky. I don't know. I feel like he's just kind of there.
Yep, I think he used it as a little bit of motivation this year. He was awesome in spring training. He actually had a really good stretch at the end of last year once he finally recovered, because he had a very major shoulder injury, and it did take him all year to come back from. And once he came back, he had to catch up. He basically had to do his own spring training mid-season. And so Also switched bat models. I mean, there were so many things that went into his struggles when he first came back last year. And I think he's shown, I mean, he hit 362 in spring training. The home runs weren't there, but Brendan Rodgers is typically a pretty slow power hitter, slow starter. I do think he's one of the forgotten Rockies. And I think the real forgotten part is he's one of the best defensive second basemen in baseball. And so you have two pillars now in the middle of your infield, which can help someone like a Chris Bryant who's adapting at first.
So Tovar, let's just talk about Tovar's deal real quick. 7 years, 84 million. I think he'd be a free agent at 29, I think is what it was.
Yeah, so the way it's set up is, he basically got 7 years, 63 and a half, I believe, guaranteed. And then there's also a club option there. So they pick up that club option, which if things go the way they think it is, that's basically a shoe-in. That would make it, it would take him through the 2031 season and would pay him out $84 million. So a good deal for him, as an international free agent that signed, but also a good deal for the Rockies, especially if he outplays that deal.
What is it with This is the third shortstop that the Rockies have developed in the last 10, 15 years, whatever it's been. What is it about them and shortstops? Because Amador was technically a shortstop, right? But he'll end up playing second.
Yeah, he can play at both. You have an Alan Trejo who has also shown to be a pretty decent shortstop through development. I mean, I don't know what it is exactly. And Julio Carreras is going to be the AAA shortstop. He might be able to start at a couple different teams in the majors. So I'm not sure what it is specifically that helps them produce all these shortstops. But you go Tulowitzki to Trevor Story to Ezekiel Tovar. I mean, that's pretty impressive. And just to think they all kind of were slightly different players too. It's not necessarily them just finding a guy that fits a mold and then copy and pasting a development. These are very different players that they're developing.
Yeah, I was just going to say, because, Tulo and Trevor Story were power hitters. You don't really associate Ezekiel Tovar with power. He's more of a gap kind of hitter, I'd say.
Yep.
So, I mean, he's a different player.
Yeah, and I believe he set the rookie record for doubles last year. So exactly what you're saying. The ball may not leave the yard as much as those other two guys, but Tovar still has a little bit of pop, and his pop tends to end up in the gaps for doubles. And the Rockies will take either of those because those are both productive outcomes.
Third base is, of course, Ryan McMahon, who another, I don't want to say forgotten, but he's been a staple with the Rockies for the last few years. Biggest thing with him, strikeouts.
Set the franchise record last year. He was able to cut down on it a little bit in spring training. I mean, he hit 370 in spring training, which you always like to see. 10 strikeouts to 5 walks. So if he can keep that ratio, which is going to be a tough rate, I mean, that's a really good ratio. But if he can keep some semblance of that, he's going to be an immensely more productive hitter. If he can just get the ball in play, because he hits the ball hard. The problem is when you're striking out, obviously you're not giving that any opportunity to get into the field. So I think Ryan McMahon, there's a lot of expectation, and you bring up make or break years. I don't know that that's what this is as far as him being on the roster next year, but I think as far as him being a future pillar of the organization, this is kind of a year where I think they're really wanting to see a step forward from, hey, you've hit 20 home runs in multiple seasons. What happens if the strikeouts go down? Could you get to 30? Could you get to 35? Because if you get to 35 home runs, that transforms our lineup with you hitting in the 5 hole. So I think there's a lot of expectation for him this year, and I think he's taken it in stride. And obviously, if spring shows anything, I mean, a 370 average, he did okay.
So the outfield, Nolan Jones, of course, is out there, who is slowly becoming the face of the Rockies. Looks like he did strike out a bit during spring training.
Yeah, Nolan Jones, and it's part of why he ended
strikeouts?
up in Colorado. He's terrible in spring training. It's been his thing his whole career. As I said, it's part of why Cleveland had seen him in so many spring trainings and he had failed to break opening day rosters that they said, okay, we need to go in a different direction. That's part of why he's in Colorado. I think the Rockies are able to say, we don't necessarily need to see the results in spring training because you're our left fielder, period. You are the best player for that spot. And so you'd like to see him flip around a little bit, but you have to think one of his homers was taken away by a game that didn't get finished. So there was a little more to his line than it showed, but notoriously bad in spring training.
So Brenton Doyle is in center field. Of course, he won the Gold Glove. He is a great center fielder, perfect for the giant center field that is Coors Field. He hit around 200 last year. Looks like he hit 286 in spring. They're just going to need more from the bat with him.
Exactly, and I think Brendan Doyle, he's going to get to a point where you're going to be able to pencil him in as a Gold Glove winner almost every year. I mean, you're talking about a guy that might go on one of those Nolan Arenado runs where he wins 6, 7, 8 of them in a row. But yes, the only chance he's going to get to do that is if the bat comes around. And he looked better. He looked more compact to the ball. That was what he wanted to work on. He said, I want to work on being able to react to pitches better. So that's getting myself in a position when I'm swinging and loading to be able to react to off speed, to be able to react to something that looks really good out of the hand and then dips out. So it's a very much a work in progress, but his skill set is one that a lot of teams could use. And if he could just got on base more, I think the Rockies are going to be more aggressive stealing bases this year too. So he will be a big beneficiary of that.
Right field is, of course, Charlie Blackmon, but we were talking before we recorded, that's going to kind of probably be a little bit of a rotation out there.
Yeah, that whole right side of the field is going to be kind of day to day. You're going to see different guys. You're going to see different ways. But yeah, with Sean Bouchard getting sent down today and Tolia making the team, that does pencil in more chances for Charlie Blackmon in right field. Chris Bryant is starting in right field today in their final spring training game. So he will have the ability to do that. Tolia can play a right field. Their main problem is that Ella Reese cannot play right field. If he could play right field, that rotation actually might work a little more smoothly. So there's going to be a bunch of different names out there. They're not going to push the veterans too hard in right field and risk injuring them, because I think what the Rockies see, and they limited Chris Bryant even in spring training, is without Chris Bryant and without Charlie Blackmon, we're relatively hopeless. And so they need to stay healthy and, see at least what could be of this lineup if they did.
What should the Rockies expect from Blackmon going in? What is this, his 14th year? Something like that?
Yeah. So this is, and he has become obviously the pillar of the clubhouse. Anyone that you ask, who is your leader? Any offensive player you ask, they say, well, Chuck's been helping me out a lot. And then they'll go on to other names, but he comes up in every conversation. He is, and it's funny that his locker's in the back corner of the clubhouse, because in some ways he's kind of like the clubhouse Yoda. I mean, he knows everybody in there. He has helped everybody in there. He's not going to come in, do these rah-rah speeches all the time, but when he does speak, people really listen. And so he is, I guess you could call him the godfather of the Rockies. He is the guy who controls all of it right now. And I think if he's healthy, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect a good season. He finished last year on a torrid pace, and he's been awesome in spring training. So I think he's ready to have a full season of production this year.
Blackmon will DH, Montero will DH. I'm sure Chris Bryant will get some DH days. What do you see the lineup looking like?
The lineup is going to be, if you look at their lineup today, that's what it'll be. So you'll have Blackmon hitting leadoff, which surprised to absolutely nobody. Right. Chris Bryant hitting 2-hole, which he has done anytime he's been healthy. I think the really interesting one is Brendan Rodgers. You brought up, he's kind of a forgotten Rocky. Bud Black hasn't forgotten him. And most times that Rodgers has been healthy recently, he has hit him in that cleanup spot. And I think that says a lot about how much he respects his ability to put together at bats, get the ball in play. And so Nolan Jones hitting in the 3-hole in front of him, man, you get on base, you're going to get driven in. So it's a really nice lineup. If Doyle can hit from that 9 spot and center field, it's going to completely change who they are, because Ezequiel Tovar 7, Eleris Montero in that DH spot hitting 8th, those are also guys that can really produce. So they have a deep lineup when healthy. They really do. It's just a matter of those results coming together instead of one guy's hot one week, one guy's hot the next week. They're going to need this to become a good lineup 1 through 9. That's how any good offensive team produces.
And on the bench, you mentioned Alan Trejo already, but then there's the Jake Cave, Greg Jones spot. I don't know what do we do with that?
Very, very odd. And I'm sure there's a lot of different answers for what happened in this, but it was very odd to see Bradley Zimmer get released after having a very good spring training. And I know you can look at it any different type of ways. You have to look at the pitchers he got those hits off of, what the game situations were. I mean, of course, all of that stuff matters, but Jake Cave has just not been a very good major league player. And the thing that he has over both of them is he doesn't strike out as much. And I think that's what the Rockies may have liked. Now, the thing that has sunk Jake Cave to a point where he could be traded for cash considerations was he started to strike out. So something that wasn't a thing early in his career now is a thing. So it's going to be very interesting. Greg Jones is the superior athlete. He would give them ultimate versatility because he plays shortstop and center field. So in many ways, he could eliminate one of their extra roster guys altogether. I don't think that's what they're going to do. And if I had to guess, Greg Jones will probably start in AAA. And, you'll kind of have to figure out, is Jake Cave that guy? Because they need that lefty and they need a backup to Brenton. But Jake Cave has not shown to be a very good major league hitter.
Let's move over to pitching and the rotation. Kyle Freeland, of course, will start opening day. We know what we're going to get from Kyle Freeland if he's healthy. He's the leader of the staff, especially with Zahlmann out. And then after that, you've got some question marks. We don't know what Kyle Quantrill is going to be like. Austin Gomber had his ups and downs last year. There's Dakota Hudson. There's Ryan Feltner. There's just a lot of questions after Freeland right now.
Well, and that's the problem, right? Is that's what it's starting to feel like year over year. There's a lot of questions. And Cal, I thought, had he had a very exciting spring training, but then he came out in his last outing and allowed 12 hits and 6 earned runs. So and 4 of those hits were home runs. So that's not going to play very well, obviously, in Coors Field. So I don't know. They want him to get back to what he was in Cleveland, right? In 2021, he had a 2.89 ERA. 22, he had a 3.38. So he has shown to be a very good pitcher. They just need to figure out what went wrong last year and how do you fix it. And so I'm sure that's what spring training's been about. In talking to him, he's very motivated. I think that it just felt like a new opportunity for him to really contribute. And I think at his best, he could arguably be their best pitcher. But there are some outings where he goes out there and you think, oof. And this latest spring training was one of those. But spring training results are always with a grain of salt.
Austin Gomber is always going to be attached to the Nolan trades. So, people are going to want a lot from him. I mean, he's a number 3 starter, number 4 starter, probably at best.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it depends, obviously, what you're wanting. For the Rockies, he's, at least right now, just based on what they've seen, he's probably their second best pitcher, but he's going to get slated third in their rotation behind Cal. So he's been so weird, right? I mean, ever since he's come, he's had these stretches where he's been awesome. I mean, you look at last year when he's in August, when he's in different months, he's got great ERAs, he's doing his thing, and then a back injury sunk him, or walks have sunk him, or, any number of things. So Austin Gomber is an ultimate wild card, but I do think last year he showed for a spurt there that if he is your number 3 and he is pitching to the level that he did, say, in a July, where you have a 3 ERA over 5 starts, that's an awesome 3 starter if Cal can also be there. So lots of question marks, and it could easily go either way. So it's a very roulette-filled rotation, I would say.
Well, we also know that the bullpen is a bit of a mess. One left-hander down there because they just don't have anybody else. We were talking before I recorded that Evan Justice got sent down. Lucas Gilbreth is still hurt. Daniel Bard, I mean, we don't know when he's coming back yet. So it's Justin Lawrence is the closer, Tyler Kinley's over there, and then a bunch of kind of just guys put together.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting bullpen. I mean, you have Anthony Molina, who made it from the Rule 5 draft. Kind of a cool moment when he found out, on the phone with his mom, some happy tears. It was pretty, and getting pitchers from Tampa, for example, or Herman Marquez, has worked out for the Rockies before. So there is talent there, but like you said, ton of question marks. Jake Bird led the league in innings, and for stretches, he was really good. But by the time that fatigue seemed to set in, he fell apart at the end of the year. Justin Lawrence had a horrible spring training. Tyler Kinley had a great one. You have Jalen Beeks, who's your only lefty. He's also from Tampa, so you're seeing a trend there. It's going to be interesting because there's a lot of questions. And I think Lucas Gilbreth will slide in very quickly when he comes back. And they're expecting that will be in the first half of the season. But what are you going to do with lefties before then? Because Jalen Beeks can only throw so much.
Right.
And you really just don't have pitchers that can dominate a lefty that way. So it is going to be tough. And, having a Victor Vodnik who hasn't pitched a full season, having a Nick Mears who dealt with injuries all last year, there are, just as you said, so many question marks about what this bullpen can turn into.
Yeah, it's do they have their rotation set for the first series yet? I mean, it's Freeland. Is it Freeland?
Yeah,
and then Gomber.
Yep, and then Feltner and then Dakota Hudson. So that's going to be the rotation to start out. Obviously, when you get into the season and you have injuries, maybe a skip start, that's going to fluctuate. But starting opening day, that'll be their 1 through 5. And I think that makes sense. And obviously, Peter Lambert, who we didn't mention in the bullpen, he's going to be that long relief guy. And he's been pretty decent in that role before, but he is very much breathing down the necks of that rotation. If someone struggles, he will get inserted into that rotation. I can guarantee you.
I was going to say he's like the next logical guy. He's the next man up. It feels like because they don't have anybody young to come up yet.
No, they don't, and that's where their real lack of depth is. You have guys at AA level, but when you look at that AAA level, you have Noah Davis, you have Carl Kaufman, you have guys that don't necessarily inspire much confidence right now.
Right. Couple things before we go. Still wait and see on Bud Black's extension.
Yep, still wait and see. Obviously, reports came out that they were talking, and that is what it is. I'm sure they've talked all off season. I don't know that that's necessarily something new, but yeah, he is going to go into opening day, I would expect, without that extension done. And the Rockies said it was so they could focus on the team. Who knows? Maybe the results bore that out, and we see a team that no one expected, and you think, wow, I'm glad they focused on the team. But odds would tell you that that's not the complete reason, and that there's probably a couple more reasons why this is happening. So
where are some of the Rockies' best prospects going to be in the minor league system?
A lot of them are going to be AAA, AA. You're going to have I would expect Jordan Beck to be at AAA personally after winning their MVP of the spring training. I would expect a Yankees Fernandez to probably be at AA. I would expect an Adael Amador to do a little bit of both, but he should start at AA. Julio Carreras will start at AAA. So they're kind of spread all over. A lot of the guys that finished last year in AAA are obviously going to go back, like an Aaron Schunk, a Coco Mont. So there are guys that will be in AAA, but yeah, they're kind of going to be spread out. But yeah, the bulk of all of it is going to be AAA, AA, which is exciting if you're a fan, because that means they're on the doorstep.
Is Veen going to be in Albuquerque?
Veen should be in AA Hartford, I believe. So he will likely start the year in Hartford.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
And then what about some of the pitchers? Like, are those guys all single A rookie ball still? Jaden Hill should be single A probably, right?
Jaden Hill, I would think, will probably be AA Hartford, if for no other reason than his switch to the bullpen. That, I think, accelerated him a little bit. If he was a starter, completely agree. But it does look like he would probably start at a AA as a reliever this year.
And then what about Dolander?
Dolan, he's the wild card, because I would expect personally that they would start him at a place like High A Spokane.
Yeah.
But it also would not surprise me if they start him even lower, because I think it's easy to forget he's still never pitched a game for them. And especially if you look at the spring breakout, not even being an official game, he still technically has never thrown in a quote unquote real game for them. So it is going to be interesting. I think it will tell you a lot about where they feel he is at developmentally, because if he does start at High A Spokane, well, Carson Palmquist was there most of last year, and he was at least inching towards maybe a bullpen role this year. So just because he's at High A, I don't think should be a negative, but it would not surprise me if that's where he ends up.
Do they expect Hughes back at all this year? Or is he going to be off this whole year?
I would think, will follow the exact same timeline as a Herman and Antonia. I think expecting any of those three pitchers to contribute this year, it would be a bonus, I'll say. I don't think they are in any rush to get those guys back, and nor should they be. I think they need to let that rehab play out. And so maybe the end of the year for the two major leaguers, but I would doubt that Gabriel Hughes will throw in games this year.
And last but not least, there's still been no announcement on where you can watch the Rockies on cable.
Drew Goodman came out and said that the cable announcement should come this week. We're at Tuesday though, and it opens Thursday. So for fans that were expecting, I saw on social media stuff like that of, well, I hope it's Altitude, or I hope it's not going to be any of those type of channels. I can almost promise you that the Rockies.tv, that is what the focus is. This cable option is just going to be in addition to that. So it's going to be on a local channel, and anyone who's probably doesn't live in Denver is most likely not going to get that channel. And outside of Colorado, I would say it's going to be almost impossible for someone to get the Rockies unless it's on Rockies TV. But as they kind of advertise this year, Rockies TV is blackout free. So home games, no matter what, you can watch them all on that.
Yeah, I mean, the streaming is the way they're going. We talked about that when we podcasted about when it first came out. Like, that's kind of the way people are going to have to find it. You'd have to search for it, but you do have a how-to guide on denvergazette.com. You have to search back and look to make sure how to use it. All right, Luke, like we said, the season starts on Thursday with Kyle Freeland, and then who's Arizona throwing? Zach Gallen?
They're throwing Zach Gallen. So, yeah, it'll be ace on ace. It might be a rare low-scoring game for an Arizona-Colorado game, but anytime you say that, you're pretty liable to have an 11-10 game where 6 different guys in the bullpen get shelled. So we'll see.
So Luke and I will be checking in every Friday on this podcast to talk Rockies before the weekend series start. So make sure to look for that once the season gets going. And Luke, enjoy the season, and we'll talk to you again.
Sounds good.